Well, hello everybody. It is Hyperborean Radio calling out to everyone on the Wastelands of Modernity. This is the Lore Keeper speaking, and with me today is CG.
Hey everybody. Yeah, this is CG, and our show today is the Iron Gods. And with that, I also want to let everybody know that we have two shows, each one an hour long, one on here on YouTube, and then we do record another hour later, which we put on the podcast, this is the family-friendly version, we'll call it, where on the podcast platform, it's a little less family-friendly because we're not really that worried about getting kicked off there so much because, well, it's less YouTube-y, I guess. I think that's one way to put it. It's less YouTube-y on the podcast platform. But we put this out here so that people can at least get a little taste of what it is that we're talking about. But yeah, anyways, we wanted to do a show on the Iron Gods because just this last week was World's Strongest Man. And you got something that you'd like to say?
Sure. So, first of all, congratulations to Tom Stoltman for winning World's Strongest Man. I don't think he listens to us, but on the extreme off chance, congratulations, Tom. First Scotsman to ever win it. But one of the main things that sort of brought this topic to mind and is why we decided to talk about it was we were watching some strongman competing, and one of them, I think it was Robert Oberst, mentioned the Iron Gods in reference to sort of a grouping of the gods of strength. And if you look at strongman events, most of them are based off of European myth, especially the ones that are currently in existence. For example, the Hercules hold, the Atlas stones. These are really, really obvious, but there's some others that are a little less obvious as well.
Right, well, and I was going to say, besides the ones that are really obvious because they have a deity's name in it, like Atlas stones or Thor's hammer, there's a lot of these are actually based off from heroic deeds, feats, even deities, as a matter of fact, which really there's a very slim difference between the heroes and the deities, and there's more overlap than difference between the two. And as well as the way that the Atlas stones the Atlas stone competition is done, it has less to do with Atlas besides the shape of the boulder that they're lifting, and actually has more to do with the I believe they're called man stones or mantis stones, but it's a set of stones that was set up, and then to prove your manhood, to prove that you're a man, and not just a man, but a strong man, you pick this stone up and then you set it on a post. And there was a range of weights, much like what you see in strongman today.
Well, and it's a very long-standing tradition. I mean, you have the Olympics, you have the Highland Games, and these are just two of the examples of basically, we have consistently and constantly had these feats of strength as a test for manhood, as a test for job. I think there's specific stones in Scandinavia for manhood. I think there's some that are specific in Iceland to get a job on like a sailing ship or like a fishing ship. And one of the reasons that I got really into strongman, and it's actually one of the things that inspires me to actually focus on strength and physical conditioning, is this sort of realization that when I was watching strongman, I actually commented to CG about this. I told him, if the men in my life when I was younger, the adults, had actually been closer to the strongman, I might have actually looked forward to being an adult. Because I think a lot of people these days, when they look at adults and they see, people that are tired, people that are worn down, people that have forgotten how to have fun, or they're in a job that they hate, more often than not, they're not really in physical shape. People don't really look forward to adulthood. They just view it as this sort of drudgery. One of the big step ups when you're going from boy to man is that massive uptick in strength and physical capability. And a lot of people never bother to actually develop it. And I think that having those inspirations, both in real life with, modern strongmen like Eddie Hall, Brian Shaw, Tom Stoltman, and his brother Luke Stoltman, they have a fairly good relationship, at least that you see. But also that mythic aspect that most people have largely left behind. Even most Christians don't even bother to keep, their own supposed heroes going. So,
but yeah, and here's the thing: is while we're going to focus on on World's Strongest Man and heroes and deities, the reality of it is you get a bunch of guys around doing physical labor. We all start competing. I mean, I've worked on roofs before. Who can carry the most bundles of shingles? Who can carry the most rolls of asphalt? Who can carry the biggest bucket of whatever? It doesn't matter, and we all do this to push each other. And part of it is actually taking pride in what it is that we do. I not only do this, I do this better than you, and I can do more of it than you because I'm just stronger than you are. It can be throwing hammers. It can be lifting anvils. It can be flipping logs, which is like the finger thing that's in Strongman, which is actually named after. I'll let Ike tell you guys about it because he was kind of excited about it. But it doesn't matter what it is. It can be lifting a stone, rolling the most barrels. I mean, we'll race even if the thing isn't heavy. And most often we will do not just who can lift the most, but who can do it the faster in the most times. So it's a combination of strength and speed. And this goes back into other old traditions. But I was actually surprised to find out that Fingerfingers was actually named after a deity. Yeah, a deity. Here, I'll let you tell it. It's the giant.
Finn McCool was the name he was looking for. Who even I didn't really remember was a giant. I keep remembering Finn McCool. I know he does gigantic type things, but usually in the stories I've read of Finn McCool, he's usually depicted as human, which really is interesting because one of the things that we tend to talk about a lot is there's this sort of liquidness between whether or not someone is a hero, the sort of spiritual ancestor rather than the deified ancestor, the god, demons. And it's all this jumbled up mess because very few things are actually one thing. And I think a lot of people forget that. Hercules, or Heracles as his actual name is, he is a god of strength, more or less. He is remembered as a demigod hero. He's, the 12 labors of Heracles. But I don't actually remember if the Pillars of Heracles is actually a myth where he has to hold them, or if he just pushes them up. Because in pop culture, often he actually has to hold them, keep them from falling over. Like he actually has to maintain them, and that gets depicted in a lot of pop culture.
Well, what it is the story of Heracles and Samson from the Christian Bible has gotten conflated. And there might actually be stories of Heracles having to hold up the pillars, but really I think the pillars have more to do with Atlas than anything else. And I could be very, very wrong on this. And if there is a story of Heracles holding up pillars, but I'm pretty sure Heracles is the one that knocked him down. Or is it Samson that knocked him down? But I know that these two, they get conflated a lot because I've heard academics talk about it before, and they would talk about how Heracles and Samson got conflated a lot because they're both strong men, and yeah, it's just a thing. But Heracles did actually have something to do with pillars, which was in some versions of the story, Atlas holding up the sky. After Heracles tricks Atlas out of the golden apple, or tricks Atlas into going and getting the golden apples for him, while Hercules holds up the sky. He switches spots, and then he basically takes mercy on Heracles, or on Atlas, and then does actually help out with a couple pillars, and not all of the stories still have Atlas holding up the sky.
Well, in fact, some of them even have Atlas dead, petrified by Medusa's head via Perseus. That's where the Atlas Mountains come from in North Africa. But it's one of those things, and it's something that I think a lot of people, when they take mythology from pop culture, they can mix it up. Because the pillars, it's Heracles putting them up, and I think they're on the... Most people assume that it's referencing the Straits of Gibraltar in that myth. But who knows? But... yeah, I was wondering, because I hadn't actually found the story of Heracles sort of having to hold them up, and I think that might actually be from Samson, like you brought up. And this is another thing that happens, is either pop culture or mythology that from the Christian Bible has been directly influenced into European stories. And it's something that has to be kind of noticed, but it's not a big deal, because it's like the Atlas stones. Atlas is not picking up a sphere and just putting it on tables, like the Atlas stones are. You're not just lifting them up. It's referencing the god, but the actual event is based more off of just, the lifting of stones, the man stones that you brought up. And it's not just in mythology, and it's not just, strongmen has been around for a very long time. And it used to just kind of be the default. You were expected to be strong. The idea of a weak man was viewed not very positively. I'm sure there's exceptions to the rule, but even for a pretty good amount of time, the nobility and the upper crust, so to speak, prize the ability to be strong, at least in combat. So there's all these different things, and it also brings to mind something important, which is you can't focus too much on comfort. To a certain extent, you do want to come home, to a loving wife, a soft sofa, and just kind of relax your night away. But on the same token, if you don't have that discomfort, you aren't able to actually grow. Your bones get stronger when there's micro fractures. Your muscles get stronger when they tear a little bit. You can also get horribly injured, but little bits here and there actually make you stronger and stronger.
Well, and a lot of the competitions too, if you look at them, and it's not just World's Strongest Man. It's like the Highland Games, for instance. There are feats of just brute raw strength, but then there's also feats of skill. Because while brute strength is good, skill is also good, and if you can combine strength with skill, well, now you got something peak. Like the caper toss, for instance. That's just one version. I'm not a fan of the caper toss, but it does show some physical coordination. I'm more a fan of log tossing. Think giant javelin. And not giant long, giant big around. The smallest log starts at about 8 inches around, or 8 inches through, and 8 feet long. And who can throw it the furthest, but not just the furthest, also the most accurate. So that was from a cultural fair where I'm from, and it was part of the logging competitions, and that actually comes from a game that some loggers used to play, which is who can stack the logs the highest from the ground, which means eventually you get to the point where you're throwing them. So what do you do if you're trying to stack the most logs? Well, all the heaviest ones go on the bottom. And then as you go up, well, you've kind of picked through all of the logs that you got to stack, and they get smaller and smaller and smaller. And then you're standing back and actually throwing this thing and then trying to stack them as perfectly as possible. So it's based on a game that loggers actually played out in the woods or out in the forest when they was logging, and that's transported over into a competition, which is much like World's Strongest Man. And again, we're bringing this up because it just went past, or it just went by this last weekend. Which Stoltman brother was it?
Tom.
Tom Stoltman won, followed up by Brian Shaw, and the Canadian bloke, I believe, took third place. And Robert Oberst, if you're listening, which I doubt that you are, get the fire in your butt. Start lifting more. I love the dude. He's great. He's fun to watch. I don't remember the name of his channel, but there might be some people out there that watch it. Yeah, he's a great personality. He is a showman, but he lacks when it comes to competition. So, dude, light it up.
Yeah, CG was very unhappy when he was watching the results and found out that Oberst had basically foregone points on a couple of events. But on the plus side, it's very entertaining to see that happen, and it really is something that I'm glad to see a lot of people getting into. Like, I know that one person that watches us, a member of his family, one of the youngins, is actually training for strongman. For obvious reasons, I won't be giving names out. It's not my place to do that. But it's good to see that it's inspiring people of a younger age, and it's something that I think is missing because people have actually commented on it. One of the reasons for like a health drop that a lot of people in the modern world, especially in our countries, are suffering is the lack of physical work. Now, that doesn't mean everybody needs to be a construction worker or a roofer or, a rodeo worker. But a job where you don't have to move or ever lift a heavy thing is a fairly new affair for a mass amount of the population. And it's this trials of strength and the ability to actually know how to use your body. Because like CG, you've actually noticed, a lot of people my generation have this weird stroke walk where like one of their arms is almost like just stiff and in the wrong position. And I think a lot of it has to do partially with just how alienated we are from our own bodies. A lot of people, even myself, like a few years ago, when you and I first met, I was wearing a flannel and pants in the summer because that's how unsure of myself I was physically. And I'm not small. I'm 6'2". I'm broadly built. And I was still relatively self-conscious, and it's something that is sort of plaguing a lot of people.
Right, and the physical competition, and really it doesn't matter what it is. Granted, we're focusing on strongman, which these dudes they're big and they're bulky, and some people might, well, what's the point of getting big and bulky like that? Mass moves mass. Period. That doesn't mean that smaller guys can't be strong, but when you're talking proportions, you can't expect a 140-pound man. He will almost surely, I would bet money, every dollar that I will ever make in the rest of my life, that a 140-pound man would never lift up 500 kilos. It takes mass to move that. Period. And that's with the world at their feet as leverage. But yeah, there's almost all the events. Actually, every one of them that I've looked up so far is based on some heroic feat. Well, what's the yoke carry? What kind of heroic feat is that? I sent it to you. Like, I can't remember the name of the guy, but he picks up in Legend. He picks up a bull on his shoulders and runs around an arena.
I think that's Milo of Croton, and I think he carries the bull from calf to adulthood. And this is actually another example of a myth getting fused into Heracles in Disney's Hercules, because they do not use the original Greek name, though they use the Greek god name. Disney made a complete mess there. Let's not even get into that. But he does the whole sort of lifting the calf in one of the scenes. And like you were talking about how mass moves mass, and it's even if you have the world at your feet, and you're speaking from experience because like you've told me stories about your uncles, and there was the one tiny guy, crazy strong as long as he had the world at his feet. It was almost like there was a guy in Hercules' myth, Heracles. gosh darn it. But Heracles, he was beloved by Gaia, so as long as his feet were on the earth, he was stronger than Heracles. But if he was lifted up by Heracles, dude could get ripped in half. And I think that might have actually been a sort of mythical reference to that one uncle.
Yeah, in a way. And actually, can't remember the actor's name, Kevin Sorbo. He played Hercules in a TV show in the 90s, I think it was. And he had a sidekick. And that is who that sidekick was based off from. Everybody's like, Hercules didn't have a sidekick. That's right, he didn't have a sidekick, but he did have a friend in some of the tales. So, a B production, C production, D production, whatever, low budget TV production of Hercules actually got something right.
Well, and that individual was actually more his enemy, but he did have. Oh, it wasn't?
Not always.
Oh, well.
I'm trying to desperately to not talk to the back of the mic, so if you guys hear me echoing right now, that's what's going on. We still have one mic,
but we've got a new setup, and it might be a bit awkward at first.
Yes.
But well, and in the story of the Hydra, he does have backup because he had his cousin there to cauterize the wounds for the Hydra. But yeah, it's a whole thing. All these myths, I think one interesting thing when you actually look at a lot of these stories of these extremely strong individuals, whether that's Finn McCool with the Fingal's fingers, Atlas, Heracles, Thor, because we haven't really talked about Thor, even though he's another one that's explicitly mentioned in modern stories and is known for being very, very strong. Though in the actual Eddas, just to clear something up, he is the second strongest in physical strength. Hodr is actually considered the strongest god physically, the blind god. But Thor, and he actually has, this is my favorite bit about Thor's mythology that I noticed, is so he has a belt, and old belts were very thick and big. They weren't just like tiny belts like we have now. They were actually like a piece of clothing in and of themselves. They weren't just to hold your pants up. They were basically closer to the strongmen's belts in terms of size.
Yeah, you go back far enough, they actually called them girdles.
Not just for women, everybody. Or to keep you from looking too fat. And then Thor also has gloves, so he can lift that hammer, which specifically has too small a handle. And the interesting thing, and I brought this up a while back, actually, is these mirror strongman's materials. Because they'll have gloves for grip, and they'll have the belt for back strength. And if Thor is meant to be this symbol of masculinity, and also as strong as he is, and doing all these strong type feats, I will actually kind of wonder if that's not partially what's being referenced there.
Well, and then there's also the diet, because I believe he's accredited with eating an ox at a single sitting and drinking a keg or a cask of ale. I think that's in some of the stories. At least people's mentioned that.
Oh, he's got a very big appetite. In the story of Utgard Loki, Thor actually drinks from the beer that's supposed to be the ocean, and he actually lowers their level. That's in Icelandic poetry, supposedly the cause of the tides. Though, depends on which version. That's kind of the thing with mythic poetry, is it's got redundancy built in.
Oh, and it's a nasty segue, but the Dinnie stones, on the History Channel, yes, that channel, it's not all about aliens, but in 2019, was it? They had the strong man, world's strongest men, on the History Channel, and they had their own show, and it was Brian Shaw, Eddie Hall, Robert Oberst, and Nick Best, and they all got their name in the record book for lifting the Dinnie stones. You get your name in a record book simply for lifting them. And Brian Shaw crushed the record for the carrying of it. So Brian Shaw, modern strongman, holds the record for the furthest carry on it, and then the other three strongmen managed to get their names in the record book simply for lifting them. And you should check that show out, because there is history, there is lore that they mention all through this: Viking lore, cowboy lore, pretty much. If you like stories, yeah, they bring up a lot of stories.
Well, like the Scottish episode, it's all about replicating Donald Dinnie. That's the strong man that they're emulating through a lot of these things. They're doing Highland games.
Golden records until he was 70.
Oh yeah. And Donald Dinnie was basically a folkloric hero. Like, he entered myth, and this is kind of, well, it's like I brought up with Finn McCool. He's a giant and basically a deity, but he's also, just a hero. And it's that liquid nature, because at a certain point, the tales of a hero are indistinguishable from those of a god in many cases. And that's not some atheistic view of things. It's more of a view of the apotheosis ascension. You become it's like the line at the end of Big Fish. A man tells his stories so many times that he becomes the stories, and in that way he becomes immortal. And if you want a metaphysical reason to go with that, if everybody believes you're mightier than any man on earth, basically what do you eventually become spiritually?
Right. Well, and here's the thing: is some of these legends are so big, these strongmen were like, nah, that can't be it. It couldn't have weighed that much. They couldn't have accomplished this. That's how unbelievable some of these heroic feats are. Is the strongmen this is their business, couldn't bring themselves to believe these feats possible, even though these dudes they come close. But really, the old strongmen too, as well, it's not just about brute strength, it's also about intelligence, because quite often it was understanding body mechanics as well as the thing that you're working with. So sometimes you just have to be smarter. Okay, old piece of advice that was given to me by many old men: oh, you can't move that, oh, you can't do that, all you gotta do is be 10% smarter than the thing.
Well, and on the list of rather good old people advice that you got from the old men when you were up in the UP, one of my favorites, and just for all the young men out there that are fed up with not being able to grow a beard, old piece of advice from old men. Not us. We're not. Well, you're kind of getting old, but
I'm working on it.
But I'm not yet. But it's not a beard till you're 30. It doesn't matter if you can tuck it into your belt. It's not a beard yet. It's just the foundations of one. So if you're getting kind of worried, like you're 25, 26, 27, and you're like, I can't grow even a mustache yet, you're actually kind of on average. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. But it's these, because there's actually a lot of mentions in, mythology, folklore, basically the young man who's impatient to join the actual men. The 8-year-old that follows all the men around and tries to mimic them but can't quite because he's too small. The younger cousin that follows the hero into war who's not ready.
Right, and I wanted to bring up the young men that you brought up. But like, by young men, we don't mean young men by today's standards. We mean young men by old standards, which was much younger. With these manstones that has been brought up several times, there's typically, and it's these are everywhere. So not just Scotland, not just Ireland or England, but everywhere. Everywhere where our people were. Spain, there's versions of it. Greece, there's versions of it. Italy, there's versions of it. France, Germany, everywhere. There's versions of this. And there's always, and it surprises me that nobody's ever asked this question, because usually the smallest man stone, 110 according to the research that I've done, typically they come in 110 to 120 pounds, and then they get progressively heavier, all the way up to like 400 pounds, where you just got to be stupid strong to pick these things up. But there's always this one way off on the side that's only about 30 pounds. And nobody ever asks what that's for. And the easy answer is, as was mentioned in one of the articles I read, is, well, they use this 30-pound one for shot putting. Yep, fair enough. However, from experience, basically, of growing up logging, doing farming, stuff like this, there's always the young boys that are trying to get out there and help, but there's a certain point where they're too weak really to be of any help. There's always something set up on the side that is the minimum weight to be able to hang out with the guys. And so if the boy ain't strong enough to pick it up, he goes off and he plays with the kids. He goes off and helps mom. So there's always this thing he has to be able to pick up, and it's always something that once the kid can pick it up, all the guys are like, yeah, come on, you're good to go. And then when he starts getting full of himself, this thing that he struggles to pick up, 30 pounds for say 8 years old, that's pretty good. Maybe not 30 pounds on a bar, but 30 pounds awkward shape. That's impressive for a little kid to pick up. So the kid eventually will get full of himself. So what does the adults do? Walk over, pick up that thing that he struggles with, and shows the child just how far they can throw it. Shot put.
Well, and that's one thing that I think is very different from modern strongman, but compared to old strongman, is they didn't have bars and weights. Like Heracles was not training by pushing, trying to figure out how good his deadlift could be. How good is your squat with the barbell, Heracles? That wasn't how that worked. You were expected to have something closer to functional strength because you had to lift an awkward-shaped rock. You had to be able to lift this ridiculously long log. You had to be able to pick up the sheep if it needed to be picked up. You had to do all these things. You had to dig a hole. You had to climb. You had to do all these things. And you developed functional strength, and you also got ludicrously strong. It's like even today you have the idea of the sort of country strong, where people that don't look like the classic bodybuilder, but are just crazy strong. It's because they actually have functional strength. And a lot of the strongman actually do have functional strength. Like Eddie Hall, I think he completed the Navy SEAL test run. Maybe it wasn't the Navy SEAL. Maybe it was whatever the equivalent is in England. Is that like
Royal Navy?
Royal Navy. All right. So the fun thing about England is literally just stick Royal in front of everything, and apparently you've got the right name. Air Force, Royal Air Force. Just stick a crown on it, basically.
But yeah, it's another nasty segue. But we're about halfway through right now, and by the way, thank you everybody for listening this far. If you made it this far, if not, well, I guess I'm not talking to you anymore. But there's heroes and legends, etc., etc. However, there are some events that they've included it in the strongman, and it probably is actually based off a real thing, and I can guess to make something realistic, but the Wheel of Pain. The Wheel of Pain from Conan. It's fictional.
Well, and that's another thing that is... It's something that we could probably go into depth on another show, but stories are extremely important, whether or not they're fictional, or whether or not they're true, or whether or not they're mythic, which is usually a blend of the two. And Conan, especially the movie, which was, compared to the books, I'm just going to be honest, is absolute trash. There's a few really good scenes in Conan, like the prayer to Crom towards the end, but by and large, the actual film it's not bad, it's not good. The second one is absolutely terrible. But the importance of stories, the importance of the heroic. This is something that I think is missing. We're not allowed to really think about heroes anymore. They always get sort of crud on them. You know, well, that hero was mean to woman, or this hero was this or that. I'm not going to try and emulate what gets said about a lot of our heroes. But there needs to be that heroic ideal, and one of the core elements of that is strength, both emotional and physical. The ability to stoically take the world on your shoulders and then throw it off as hard as you need to when you got something you need to hit really, really hard.
Well, and then I know that there's some people out there saying, but what about the fast guys? They have nothing to do with this subject. And there are heroes that are fast, or they're known for their speed or for their endurance as opposed to their strength. Whether it's there's the speed with a spear or a sword, or the speed that they can run with, or the weight that they can carry while they're running. Marathon is one of them. Yeah, you get your horn tooted all year round. We're tooting the horns of the strongmen. And do you happen to remember like the name of the guy? He would sort out he would sort out his men. He'd hold a competition, and it's what the Highland Games, I believe, are based off from, where the faster guys became his couriers, his messengers, and then the strong guys became his warriors.
Not a clue, if I'm honest. I don't remember the guy's name. I will say this, though. The Highland Games, or at least a precursor to them, was partially, people have pointed it's tied to fertility festivals. And most people will go, yes, because you lift heavy things, it means you will have good wheat. And they'll make it all sorts of fuzzy-duzzy, shiny bunny, whatever. I think it's simpler than that. It's sort of like how when we have, fairs, the men will test their strength and show off, hey, I can rope a cow real good. Hey, I can lift this really heavy thing. Look at the skills I have. It's the same with women. Women will show off, I can bake this well. I can do this well. I can sew. I can garden. I can cut someone when I really need to. I don't know how often that is. But there's physical events for women too, like the Olympics. They actually used to have one of their breasts hanging out so that they would not have these young men swing in and, mix in with the women and basically try to win the events. But the point I'm getting at is it's tied into some people. Basically, man able to lift heavy stuff and do these things that require strength. Well, when has strength ever been an unattractive quality? And following up with that, attraction equals pairing equals baby.
Right, and I just looked up this information again. What I was talking about just before this was the legend, and it's about the Highland Games. Legend dictates that during King Malcolm Canmore's reign in the 11th century, clan chiefs would hold athletic competitions to determine the strongest and fastest men of their respective clans. Of those that competed, the quickest became the clansmen and the king's messengers, while the strongest became the king's soldiers, respectively. So that's what I was talking about.
Wasn't trying to get too away from the topic, but yeah, I hadn't seen that part. But it's one of those things where it doesn't have to be absolutely ancient to have value. In American folklore, for instance, the rodeo has ties to Pecos Bill. The lumberjack competitions has ties to Paul Bunyan. These are fairly recent mythic figures in comparison to Finn McCool, or even not Donald Dinnie. Donald Dinnie is about almost a contemporary, but Malcolm Canmore.
The ship pole.
The ship pole.
That's Stormalong.
Stormalong. Oh, I thought there was, I forget his name, but there was one There's another folk hero. I just don't remember his name, but there's an American folk hero that's very much with the ship pull. I'm not. I can't remember his name though. I can't. But
Stormalong is American.
no, I know. I wasn't saying that. I'm saying that there's another figure that I remember. It's not Stormalong. I can't remember his name, but he is specifically known for the boat pull. I just don't remember his name. But it's one of those things where it's not the only thing that can get you renown and mythic status. You know, look at, for more recent options, Tesla, for instance. Tesla has this mythic, almost sage-like quality to him. So we're not saying it's just strength, but that is what this show's about. So,
Well, Pecos Bill, not known for strength. It's not that he was weak, but that is not his key attribute.
precisely, and it's usually a combination of the two. Because the rodeo, you can't do it if you're weak. You're not gonna, be able to not get bucked off the horse or the bull, or be able to lasso or do all these tricks without some level of physical strength. But the main thing is skill. And that is one thing that is also very important, is a lot of the dumb jock or dumb warrior archetype, well, not even archetype, giving it the title of archetype is too much. Trope. Stereotype or trope that shows up in a lot of modern pop culture. It doesn't exist. What you call a dumb warrior is dead. He probably wouldn't have even gotten to the warrior. I think he'd probably just be a fighter, because there's too many skill and intelligence based qualities needed to get it. Well, I mean, like the Spartans, for instance. I mean, the training for that was grueling since the day you were basically born. You will not survive that if you're stupid. Barring like strength so ludicrously high that you can be dumb as a block and somehow survive. But that's pretty darn rare. Or for instance, I lost my train of thought, so I'll pass it back over to CG.
Well, I was just going to go on with the just the sheer medical knowledge, because doctors weren't as readily available, or medical professionals weren't as readily available as they are now. So our ability to heal each other was way higher in the past than what it is now. And anybody that's done any level of research and just kind of used some logic realizes that what you was taught in school about how the average lifespan was 25 years old, and then everybody would just die of herpetogonosyphilitis and an infection from the scratch that they got on their little pinky toe while they was walking through the field, because, people couldn't grow couldn't make shoes, couldn't make shoes. Yeah, that's just a bunch of crap. Because they'd have you think nobody ever made it to old age. Yet, if nobody ever made it to old age, how did we know what old was? Because there's all kinds of pictures, carvings of really old people. Oh, I know. Maybe those were the ones that sat in the cave because we couldn't build houses and were just catered upon hand and foot, except for wait, you need to exercise, otherwise you die young. Yeah. So, anyways, there is a level of intelligence that's required to achieve certain feats, even if it's just body mechanics and leverage. But as you go back in history, broken bones, medical treatment was not quite as readily available as now. So if you broke your leg or your arm, it didn't just stay broke, because even now, even if you don't go to the doctor, it doesn't stay broke forever. It'll heal crooked. So they've kind of figured out how to operate on each other, at least to minimal levels.
Well, and this ties into other aspects of the folk culture. Like, for instance, you and I were having an odd conversation about lace a few nights ago, and it was lace actually apparently originated as it was a way to transport thread, and specifically surgical thread, because if it's wax coated and it actually works better than a spool, then say your man, if you're the woman that did the lace, gets injured. Well, now he or one of his compatriots can take the thread from the lace and then use that to actually sew him back up, so it could actually save his life. Now it's just a style option and what basically doilies are made from. But it's one of those things that it goes back thousands of years, and if it just gets more and more interesting the further back you look. Or one of my favorite things about European folklore and mythology when it comes to strength is our people are kind of nuts, and I love that about us. We will actually go out of our way like, oh, there's a really big bear over there, go kill it. It doesn't really matter if you succeed. They just want to see if you've got the nuts to go take the bear on. And that's the whole thing with us, is we like a challenge. We like that sort of line between life and death. And I think the fact that we have largely lost that is actually robbing us of that experience. We need to have that. We need to have the ability to feel like we could die, but we won't. And not in this sort of artificial way. That's partly where you get the thrill seekers. You know, I'm going to jump off a cliff into the ocean. I'm going to ride my dirt bike over that hill. I'm going to mountain bike on the peak of a very thin strip. I'm going to do parkour and jump from building to building. And it's just ingrained in us. We absolutely adore situations where we could die or we could just be freaking awesome. That's kind of our two options there.
Well, it's the hold my beer attitude. Hold my beer. I am going to perform the impossible. This stone is so large, nobody can move it. Hold my beer. I will figure out a way to move that thing. Just to prove you wrong. I will perform the impossible. Nobody can sail around the world. Yeah. Here, hold my beer. I'll be back in a couple years. And people are going to die on the voyage, but we always seek to perform the impossible, and that's one of the things about strongman.
It's to surpass your limits, and that's something we're always trying to do. We're always trying to surpass our limits. We're always looking for adventure. I mean, if you think about it, there's a book which was more or less fantasy. I don't think it was overly fantastical, but Around the World in 80 Days. This used to be something that there was like a bet, like there's no way you could do that. Even if you had a hot air balloon, there's no way. 80 days, that's ridiculous. Nowadays, you could probably do it in a couple of days. And that's mostly just having to wait for the plane to arrive. If you could go plane, or heck, if you had a plane that could actually not have to refuel, I think you could probably break a day with modern technology. You might be really, really sick by the time you land with that speed, but who knows? And it's that constant need to excel. It's that challenge to greatness. That's one thing that the strongman still embodies. And the best part, this is my favorite bit, it's not just that extreme strength. It's then the camaraderie that the strongmen have. You know, the modern strongman, these people that could rip your arms off and slap you with the wet end. They're also, on average, fairly brotherly with each other. And it reminds me of sort of the relationship you have in, like, the Argonauts or the Fianna of Ireland.
Well, yeah, they compete with each other, but they also give each other shit. And it's, if you watch how these guys interact, the Stoltman brothers, Eddie Hall, who's I don't know if he's actually retired, but right now he's doing something different. I think he actually retired from Strongman, but he still hangs out with these guys. Brian Shaw, Robert Oberst, Nick Best. I can't remember the Russian dude's name. But they're starting to take him under his wing too, because he won World's Strongest Man last year. And then he showed up for a competition that Brian Shaw put on, the Shaw Classic. And he shows up with a chip on his shoulder, and a bucket full of arrogance, and basically made an ass out of himself and lost. But these guys, rather than just rejecting him for that young guy, because he's a younger fella as far as strongman goes. He's mid-20s, I think. And really, you're not actually considered a full-grown adult in strongman until you're about 30.
Well, and oddly enough, that corresponds to our ancestral cultures, because like the Spartans, for instance, they're one of the most obvious examples of this. You could not marry until you were 30. That was a rule of Spartan law. And it makes sense because men do not physically mature typically all the way till they're 30. That doesn't mean we're functionally children. Like, I am not functionally a child. But it is something to take into account. And the person you were thinking of, by the way, was Alexei Novikov, and he was Ukrainian. So probably good he wasn't here.
Either way, if he doesn't like it, screw it. I'll punch him in the knee and run away. Whack him in the knee with a stick. How do you beat a guy like that with a long stick while he's sleeping in bed? Usually about the head and shoulders. But anyways, yeah. My point is the other strongmen, they could have turned their back on him because he was disrespectful. If you watch the Shaw Classic, he wasn't paying attention. He wasn't really putting in some effort. He acted like he was doing everybody a favor simply by being there because he won the World's Strongest Man that year, which was not very long before the Shaw Classic. But rather than doing that, all these other strongmen, because he failed utterly, but the other strongmen, rather than turning their back on him, rather than shunning him, took him under their shoulders, and now they're under their wings, and they're patting him on the back, giving him advice. And he was much better behaved this year, far more brotherly, had more camaraderie with the other strongmen rather than standoffish, and that chip got knocked off from his shoulders. And rather than punishing him for having the chip on his shoulder, they took him under their wing and kind of invited him into the fold, which is one of the things I really love about strongman. And if it starts getting in the way of the other sports, I'll just stop caring.
Well, and one very nice thing about strongman is everyone wants to win World's Strongest Man, but like, here's the thing: World's Strongest Man, well, it's awesome, and I love strongman as a sport. There's actually a kind of call. I don't know necessarily within the actual strongmen who compete, because they probably do want to go to World's Strongest Man and try to win it. But it's not the only sort of international competition. Like, I think there's also Giants Live and a few others. So technically, there could be something eventually, even maybe the Shaw Classic, or the, I forget if it's called the Arnold Classic or something like that, that could excel from World's Strongest Man, because people have been complaining, like, there's certain events that they want brought back, certain ones that shouldn't be there. Like, why aren't you at least live streaming or, doing something with this? Like, why is it taking forever to get this on the air? We have a YouTube. So people have been talking like maybe there's another one, because while it has a great title, it doesn't technically mean that you're the world's strongest man. It does and it doesn't. Like, I'm not going to take anyone's title away from them. I don't have that power in the first place. But a lot of it does come down to events and what you score really well in 1 year. You might, like Alexei Novikov. He just, and he was small for a strong man, and he just completely creamed the competition the year before. He didn't even make the top 10 this year. And I don't think it had anything to do with his attitude. If anything, I'd say his mind was a bit in there. He might have been a tiny bit cocky from that, but I don't know. I didn't see that on him this year. But he didn't crack the top 10. But you had Bobby Thompson, who's a Virginian. This was the second year. Last year he got invited as a replacement. This year he was straight up invited, and he cracked the top 10. Granted, he withdrew, I think, on the second day at some point. I don't remember why, but he ended up in last place in the top 10. Still, top 10 strongest men. That's just not a small thing. And I think one thing that the reason that I was talking about all that is, while it's really big deal if you win World's Strongest Man, it's not the be all end all. Like, you can win World's Strongest Man and then it never win it again and then kind of just fade into obscurity. Like, there's people that are fairly famous as strongmen that have never won World's Strongest Man. They're just consistent. They have the right attitude. So while everyone who's competing wants to win, that is not the only point. Like in the Shaw Classic, that didn't have a lot of status. That was just, it's Brian Shaw. He's 4-time winner. He's a great guy in the community. He is going to throw this, and people show up, and he did it, and he even admits this. He wanted to throw it, and he wanted there to be prize money, and there was prize money, so that they could have something.
Well, throw it is the wrong terminology. He didn't throw the competition. He held the competition. Throwing for the non-athletic players, throwing something means that you pretended to compete and then threw it. That is not what happened. He held the competition with his own money, and he did it. He timed it. Basically, the reason that he timed it the way that he did was because last year with the lockdowns, there just wasn't no money flowing around, so he had money. So, he was already planning on doing it, but he actually kind of rushed it.
Well, he rushed it, and I remember watching the Shaw Classic, and he had, I think it was Magnus von Ver Magnusson, Icelandic famous strongman, and he was there, narrating the event as one of the hosts, and then he had like someone whose job was to host. And the guy was just so confused the whole time. He's like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know. Like, everyone's so polite.
Right. Well, he had never participated in, he'd never hosted anything like that. And, so he showed up. He had no idea what was going on. And he was kind of standoffish. And everybody just basically welcomed him in. Magnuson, I think his name is. Magnuson.
Gunnarsson.
Yeah, whatever. Anyways, he was explaining it to him, and then that host was actually excited about it, which was awesome because he actually got into it, like not lifting the weights, but he became thoroughly excited. And we're almost at the end of the show. But one of the things that we're going to talk about, which the show is going on in the morning up on YouTube, but this evening there will be the less family-friendly version, the adult version of the show, in which case I want to bring up the amount of sacrifice these guys put into what they're doing and some of the reasons that they do what they're doing. You don't do this. You don't do that to get strong, to get rich. It's not like playing football. It's not like playing basketball. It's not like playing baseball. This is completely different. And the odds of completely wrecking yourself are significantly higher. The fame ratio is significantly lower. The money is significantly lower. Some of these dudes, they get severely injured and then still compete. So then in the podcast version, the after show, I don't want to call it that. But in the podcast version, when we do post that tonight, I really want to go into that aspect of it.
Well, and I think I'll wrap this up by saying one of my favorite things about strongman is, and you can actually see it, like everybody that's at the strongman events who is not a strongman themselves, they look like the mini bosses for the strongmen. Like all the people that are holding the events, they all look, they're big compared to normal people, but they're not as big as the strongmen. And one thing that kind of fascinates me about this is it even happens to people that are not directly involved, like just people that are around the strongmen. And part of that, I think, is the positive influence, because as well as I do not want to be this tiny next to this guy. So you're kind of pushed to, I got to get bigger. I got to get bigger. I got to work on getting stronger. And I think it's partially a reflection of when you are around people who are strong, you want to be strong too. When you are around people that are good and there's camaraderie and brotherhood and all these positive attributes, they perpetuate themselves. Because when you have, 10 great guys and then an 11th joins, the 11th will want to emulate those characteristics. And I would much rather people were emulating positive characteristics, strength, courage, wisdom, brotherhood, kinship, all these things that I think are very important. And I think that if there's one thing we can learn from the strongman, it's physical strength, brotherhood, but most importantly, surround yourselves with the people that will make you better. But on top of that, it's on everyone else, yourself, your brother, your sister, your mother, your dog walker, what have you. We each need to perpetuate the best qualities, because eventually that will start to influence those around us, and things can get a bit better because we're a bit better. And I think that's one thing that you can take away from the strongman is if you continue to try to excel, other people around you will start doing so. You'll start rubbing off on them, basically, in a positive way, not in the odd internet way. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and sign off.
All right, I'm just going to keep it short, sweet, and simple. I'm hoping that you guys join us on the podcast, same name, Hyperborean Radio. And I'm going to steal Robert Ober's sign off for his videos. Everybody stay strong and pretty.